What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we're going to be talking about how to gain amazing game sense. And in order to do that, we're going to be covering 7 different tips to help you improve your game sense immediately so that you can instantly start being able to read the game better and win more games as a result. Because thinking smarter makes it so you don't have to actually perform as well and still get the same or even better results. But the GameLeap website is the best way to get the best results. With in-depth game sense, positioning, mechanical, in-depth agent guides, and courses. We have everything you need at the GameLeap website in order to climb, so do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, kicking it off with the first core topic that we're going to talk about, game sense related, is tracking ability and ultimate use in game. You see, there are certain abilities that can fundamentally change how you play around them entirely. Abilities like Tailwind and Paint Shells, for instance. Tailwind can make it so a jet could basically be playing anywhere, and you have to be more cognizant about the angles you could be taking with an op. Paint Shells can potentially disrupt certain default plant zones, making it so you don't want to plant in default as often. And then we got to talk about other things like flashes. If you can identify that Phoenix has no flashes left on the enemy team, then that can fundamentally change how you and your team position, and certain positions are a lot less likely to get punished, which as a result can let you set up more appropriately. Now, a super important one is tracking ultimates, because enemies that are close to ultimates or that enemies probably have ultimates, that can fundamentally change how you play a point. And even if you're not actually alive, just mentioning that the enemy has an ultimate or probably does can fundamentally change a won or lost round. Let me give you this example. Let's say that the enemy Brimstone is the last one alive up against your teammate Asova, and he comes on the point and he looks one angle, he looks the other angle, he looks heaven, he looks U-Haul or whatever, he looks everywhere. And then eventually he starts to defuse only to get ulted off the spike, tries to tap it, doesn't have enough time. Now, if you would have noticed, hey, he's one off and he did get kills in this round, so you knew he had ultimate, all you have to do is say, hey, he has his ultimate here. That can allow your server to run up, tap it instantly, bait out that ultimate. Then he's way more likely to actually win that round because he can put pressure on the actual defuse. This is just one small thing that can change the entire course of a round. All you have to do is track these abilities and ultimates. It's very important that you do so. And starting to do this more will instantly improve your game sense. And it's so easy. All you got to do is think about it a little bit. Now, moving on to the second game sense thing that you have to work on a lot is economy. And you not only need to be tracking your economy, but you need to be tracking enemy economy and certain buy points. How likely are they to buy certain things? How many players on the enemy team can buy ops? How likely are they to buy ops? Realize that sometimes characters like Jet in particular will buy an op and no armor, no abilities if they can afford it, because it's so powerful to snowball. So you have to be thinking about every possibility on the enemy team, just because if something slips out through what you think could happen, you could basically get caught off guard and lose a round that you have no business winning because you say, hey, they can't buy ops, and now you know all run down mid and their Jet player gets like 2 or 3 kills, and even though most of them are saving, they win that round because you weren't paying attention to the economy of that round. Now, you also need to be thinking multiple rounds in advance. When can you buy an op? And if you win this round, can you buy an op the next round if you save to a certain amount? If you won that first round pistol round, did you buy enough to win the second round if the enemy forces? And if the enemy does force, are you going to be playing in a way that actually will still give you a chance to win? Or are you playing a strategy that really could get shut down if the enemy does force? You got to be thinking about that, because forcing is becoming more and more common, and you have to have a game plan for it and still think of it as a possibility. These are all the factors that go into economy and the game sense of economy as a result. Now, moving on to the next tip that's going to help you improve your game sense right away is mastery of map knowledge. You need to learn all the common hold spots and just general spots that people are more likely to hold, where you can wall bang that, especially pinging it as a team. Wall banging that could be a way to flush people out without actually having to take a fair engagement at all. And then you also need to be thinking about common hold spots for certain types of characters like Jets, Razes, and Omens, because they can play the high ground. So if you just assume that they're always on the traditional spots, these people might slip by your natural crosser placement. You also need to learn the calls for locations and actually the calls that people use, not necessarily the callouts that are written on the map. Places like CT, Heaven, Hell, and U-Haul, when it's not actually called U-Haul, it's called Lamps, but it doesn't really matter because that's what people typically call it. You have to understand what people generally call things and be able to instantly understand what they're talking about. This is going to be incredibly important, not just for you calling where enemies are, but for understanding what allies are calling as well. Now, last up, you got to be thinking about default plant zones, where those default plant zones are, not just about using rollouts to disrupt them, like raise nades and things like that, which can be very powerful, learning mollies and things like that. But you also just need to know when to plant these default zones, or to either one, plant based on how safe or not unsafe you are, and two, plant for a specific call out, like plant for showers, plant for long, plant for heaven. This allows your team to call to you what your plant zone should have LOS from, because that's the power angle that they're holding, and they want to have a really easy peek onto the spike because they control that powerful angle, and it's really easy for them to harass spike diffusers. So that's a very important thing that you need to understand, and this all comes down to map knowledge and map understanding. Now, moving on to the next thing that we have to break down for game sense is the different uses and purposes of smokes. Now, the first one is to smoke off info, and this is one that a lot of people don't use in ranked play, but you pretty much need to use this all the time because pros always do this. And let's take the example of like Haven, for example. Haven attack, when you're playing that zone, that area that allows you to go to A long or A short, right? A lot of times attackers will smoke that off, even if they're not playing there, because it blocks information about going to short. It potentially puts pressure on an opper that's playing long because he doesn't know if like a Phoenix flash is going to come out of that smoke, and it basically just hides information from the enemy regardless and forces people playing on A to rotate off far slower. So this does many different things, and it's something that even just one smoke can create so much pressure on the enemy, delay rotation, set up more tension. I mean, it's just amazing what this one thing does, but a lot of people just don't do it. They completely ignore it, and whether you're pushing A or not, you should pretty much be doing this smoke like every single time. Now, the next uses of smokes is to smoke off ops, but you got to be careful up against jet players because jets can of course push out past the smoke, try to get an op pick, and then dash back through the smoke, and it's really hard to follow that up. So that's something that you got to keep in mind. You also got to understand that smokes are going to be different depending on whether or not you're trying to hold a point or push onto one. For instance, if you're trying to push onto a point, you want the smoke to actually be oozing onto the point. So if you're setting up with a Phoenix, or you're setting up with your team trying to lurk onto point through the smoke, it's a lot harder for enemies to have their crosshair placement right where they're going to come out of the smoke, and it's a lot easier for y'all to leak onto point and take space onto point for free. Now, if you're trying to be defensive with the smoke, you should be having the smoke to where the entire smoke is positioned outside of the point. So if enemies want to come into the point, they literally have only a tiny little space that they can go through, and it's a lot easier for you to actually harass that or basically shut them down as they walk through the smoke blind. Now, that being said, however, there's another level to this. As you climb the ranks and get higher and higher, you will identify what smokes are for what purposes, and if you see a smoke that's oozing onto point, it's way more likely that the enemy is using that to actually come onto point. So you want to actually spray through that smoke a lot more than if an enemy was using a smoke the other way. It's probably more like a bait, or the enemy doesn't know what they're doing. It's going to be a lot easier for you to shut that down. So basically what I'm saying is you can actually use what the correct strategy is to predict what the enemy is doing, which is really cool. This is all part of game sense, and there's levels to it, but this is just an introductory to game sense to really get the gears turning. Now, there's also ideas of meta smokes, and we talked about it a little bit with having a Phoenix flash out, but we've even seen smokes like an Omen put a smoke on top of box on C defense on Haven. One of the EU teams put a Omen smoke on top of that box, that middle box, because when the enemy breach tried to flash that actual middle box, the smoke blocked it off, which is like a 10,000 IQ play, but that is like something that could be used in the meta, and as the meta changes, so will the purpose of smokes and different abilities. So it's always important that you keep one like eye on the meta, just so that you know what to expect when one of the enemies on your team whip out some random meta strategy against you. Now, moving on to tip number 5 to improve your game sense. This is understanding characters' strengths and weaknesses and your role in every single game. So every single character has their own strengths and what they do, and this really allows you to, 1, pick that character in a certain map, for instance, and 2, play that character to their biggest strength and hold proper positions to do so. So for example, let's say you're playing Raze, right? A really powerful map for Raze would be Split. It's our most powerful map, and a really weak map would be, of course, Ascent, because having nades is very inefficient for flushing out oppers, challenging longer sightlines. So you understand that one is good and one is bad, so maybe you don't play her on, of course, Ascent, and you play her every time you get Split, so that just allows you to get a lot more easy value. On top of that, you're always positioning positioning up B heaven, because if enemies try to push into you when you have all this really powerful utility, it is incredibly easy for you to punish them, and that is what you do each and every time. Basically, you're playing in your most inherent powerful position in the strongest map using the strongest strength of your character, and just doing that and going through the motions is a big part of game sense. This doesn't take insane mechanical skill to accomplish, but just playing Raze and just bare minimum using these abilities and playing on the powerful maps for every character to abuse their strengths, that is worth so much value in itself that alone can easily help you climb as long as you develop this game sense. On top of that, there are certain things that every single character has to do, like for instance, identify that on attack, a Cypher every single time should be setting up anti-flank trips to prevent enemies from pushing up and flanking, especially on a really flank heavy map like for instance Haven. So that is something that you need to understand, you need to do, and if you don't do it, you can get directly punished for it. So accomplishing your role and playing on the most powerful maps and in the most powerful way for your character is a huge aspect on game sense, and if you master this, you're going to be able to get a lot of value, gunplay aside. Now move on to the next game sense section that we're going to talk about is none other than positioning. Now positioning is something that you're going to have to learn the hard way over time, but let's give you some examples to help you really iron out all your mistakes right away. So the first thing you need to understand is that cubbies or corners are incredibly weak if enemies check, but very powerful if they don't, of course. If you're hiding in a cubby or some sort of hidden position in like a little nook or cranny, if an enemy walks by and doesn't check you, you're just gonna get a free kill, right? But most of the time they are. Now there are a few examples when they won't check you, and that is when you are set up maybe in between them and their rotation. Like you routed through mid and they're rotating from B to A because your team connected with A. If you're playing in that cutoff or that cubby cutoff, they're not gonna check that because they just don't have the time to check every single angle. So typically, if they're way more likely to check, you need to not be hiding here. But if for some reason you either set it up to where they're less likely to check, or they just don't have the time to check, then that could be a perfect time that you set up in a cubby and try to get that free kill. Now, if you know an enemy is gonna come and they're gonna try to defuse a spike, for example, and you know the direction they're coming in a straight 1v1, straight up in the open is actually the hardest to pre-aim because it's not along any natural cover. No enemy would naturally just pre-aim the middle along a 180-degree axis, and this is the best in a straight up 1v1 where you commit to the duel. You're gonna get first shot on them because you know where they are, and they are gonna have to flick to you because you're playing basically in the middle of nowhere and they're not gonna naturally check that angle. Now, this is really good against a straight up 1v1, but terrible against multiple opponents because you have no natural cover, right? You're basically forgoing natural cover just to simply mess up an enemy's crosshair placement, which can be worth it in a straight up 1v1, but in most other scenarios, it won't be worth it. Now, as a last bit of positioning advice, if you are low, like 1 HP, you need to set up an engagement with your enemy that you basically get to shoot them without them trading bullets with you, because you're most likely gonna lose that unless you just one-tap them, which is gonna be incredibly hard. They just have to basically slightly spray onto you. This is why when you're low, you wanna actually wrap and like do things like tap the spike and wrap around, or flank through heaven, or wrap, go the long way, and do something really unpredictable that basically sets you up in a place that they're not expecting, where you could sneak up on them and kill them without them having any counterplay. Now, if you have the health advantage, if they are the ones that are very, very low, and you know this because your team called it out, fight them head on, because they're way less likely. As long as y'all trade bullets, you're gonna win that fight, and that's what you want to ensure. You don't need to wrap or get crafty when you have the health advantage, because if you do that, there's always the possibility for error, like you're not quick enough, or the enemy actually do something even tricky on top of that outplays you. So those tricky strategies should not always be incorporated because of the margin for error. Only when you know you can't take a straight up 1v1 or a straight fight head on, that is when you should incorporate those strategies, and not in other scenarios. Now moving on to the 7th big tip to understand game sense and master it is understanding the meta and what is the most meta played strategy. So you gotta understand that in Valorant in particular, it's a really esport looking game where the predominant esport characters that are picked are gonna be the characters that are picked in ranked. The predominant strategies that are used in esports are gonna be instantly incorporated in ranked. This is gonna happen pretty much across every rank. People just look at the pro scene, they see something cool, and they try to incorporate it in their games every single time. So you need to understand the meta no matter what rank you are, at least a little bit. Keep one eye on it like I talked about with the Phoenix flashing, but even like right now in the current meta, Jets are really likely to push out and challenge a lot further angles, so you need to understand that not your typical angles are safe up against ops. because Jet will often push up, like let's take Bind for example on defense. They will push up mid A and challenge a lot of these sight lines that you hypothetically think you're safe in, but you're really not. On top of this, you got to understand that because of Cypher and Killjoy, basically flanking is incredibly difficult no matter what map you are, because all of these characters are setting up anti-flank utility, so flanking isn't really that in meta right now, and at the pro level, they don't really flank that much because of this. So you got to understand these things, and it's gonna better help you play around the meta or play into it and abuse the powerful strategies, and that's just one part of GameSense that can help you become a better player and expand that mind of yours, get those creases, and just outbrain all your opponents. But speaking of outbrain, the GameLeap website is your one-stop shop to start outbraining, out-aiming, and just outplaying every single person in Valorant and easily climb all the way to Immortal and beyond. We got in-depth VOD reviews, mechanical guides, psychological guides, everything you need in order to climb. Do yourself a favor and go check it out in the links down below. But thanks so much for coming by. That's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time.